Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of 2X, the podcast where I share specific actionable advice that you can use to scale your business twice as fast. In today's episode, let's talk a bit about retention. So obviously with retention, it's all about building that brand loyalty, getting your customers to stick with you. And before I tease and go into tips around retention, I want to emphasize it because as you look at the different metrics that you will track for your business, you want to make sure that you're obviously not only making a business that is growing and scaling very effectively, but you are also on the other side of the picture, retaining those customers so that you can get the most out of them and increase that quote unquote lifetime value of your customer. Because what you will find is with certain businesses, they are really good at marketing, really good at promoting, really good at getting customers. But if they don't have good retention rates, then you end up in a situation where you build a leaky ship, so to speak. So if you go out, you raise capital, you start to scale, great, you're acquiring lots of customers. But if they're bleeding out the other side of the picture and they are maybe, using your product for only a week or only buying a single product, maybe it's not enough to offset that customer acquisition cost. So lifetime value is kind of the opposite metric to look at as you're comparing both the customer acquisition costs and lead times to get your customers to ensure that you're actually building a business. Because if you have a lifetime value of your customer that exceeds the customer acquisition costs, then it makes sense to build a business and scale around it, right? So a whole bunch of different tips we can dive into. Let's first talk a bit about kind of strategic retention, especially in a competitive marketplace. So the tips that I want to share on that are three. So one is focus on the brand. And when I say focus on the brand, you have to recognize that at the end of the day, whatever business you're building, even if it's centered around a single product or single service, that's not going to be indefinite. And you want to eventually build a brand that is teamed around a mission, teamed around a certain set of values. And the reason why you want to do that is because if you look out there, the most successful companies, they are companies that inspire their customers or their clients towards a certain identity. So if you look at Apple, for example, Apple is not just the iPhone. Apple is the iPhone, the iPad, iTunes, and it's really all about empowering people to be creative. One of their mottos, think different. So when you start to have an angle on your brand, it starts to develop, your customers are able to latch onto that, and it kind of builds the customer loyalty because people identify with the brand, they trust the brand, and therefore, even if other competitors start to mimic your product or services, they will still, your customers will still default to your brand because once you have established that brand reputation, that is kind of what people latch onto and they believe in and they are loyal towards, right? So even if you see there are many other, let's say, laptops out there or many other smartphones out there, people still tend to be loyal to Apple because they have already associated that brand with a certain level of quality, with a certain level of sophistication in the product itself. So another tip, if you're in a competitive landscape, is to consider how you can build community. And the reason why community is so strong and so effective is because once you start to form a community, and if your brand is speaking into this community as a brand leader or thought leader, it is very effective because people form relationships with other people in community. And if a competitor comes into the space and if they try to steal away your customers, it is hard for them to do that because of the bonds that are already formed within that community. If someone needs to consider moving to another community, then they have to basically reinvest the time, reinvest to kind of establish themselves in that community and build their reputation there, but also kind of get that new connection, formation of bonds, and find new people to connect with. And that's all very time intensive. And people who are already in a community would rather just remain in the one that they're happy with. So community is the second tip. Third tip is think about how you can integrate your product. And again, Apple is a great example here. Is if you look, the more you can integrate your product, your solution, whatever it may be, into the processes, into the lifestyle of the customer or the client, the harder it is for them to consider switching. So again, this helps improve retention because let's say if you are let's say if you're building some sort of software for scheduling. So software for scheduling, great. But if your software for scheduling also integrates with your employee payroll system, if it also integrates with your, let's say, asset management system where you can book different rooms, kind of assign different resources to different projects, then the more it's integrated, as someone evaluates alternative options or other competitors, the more they have to think about, oh, what else is going to break as I switch away from this existing solution that already ties everything so nicely together. So the more you integrate, the harder it is for someone to make that decision to switch, because they have to invest into either doing things manually again, or they have to look for the right solutions that also give the same level of integration as well. And usually it's not going to be that easy to do that. So those are the 3 tips around a competitive landscape. So I'll repeat them. Focus on the brand, focus on community, and focus on integration. These are by definite not the only means of doing so, but these are just some tips that I found in general help with, especially if you're in a very competitive landscape. So back to the topic of retention. As you look at retention, there are some metrics that you will become more familiar with. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with them, but I just want to kind of expose you to the lingo. So we have this thing called churn. Churn is basically how many customers leave over a specific period of time. So it's usually looked at on a monthly or on a cohort basis. So you may say like, these are the customers that were acquired in January. That's the cohort. That's the time frame, right? So churn is how many of them left. You have your customer retention rate, and that's your CRR. And that's just looking at churn in the form of percentage versus how many customers you acquired during that same period. So let's say, because you could have 1 month where more customers churned out, but if there was a higher acquisition that month, then your customer retention rate could be the same or maybe even lower. You have a renewal rate. So that's just another way of looking at the customers who do renew and didn't churn out. You may also look at things like time till inactivity. So maybe, for example, you might notice that, let's say, people come on your platform, interact with it, or use your app, whatever it is, but after maybe 2 months, they stop using it. So what is that time till they become inactive? And another one that it also ties in strongly with referral is your net promoter score. So the net promoter score, it's a very simple metric. By default, it's the question that you ask in a survey to your customers. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer a product or services to a friend or family member? And the idea here is, with the net promoter score, I won't go into the detail of how to calculate it, but basically, if someone scores a 1 to 6, that they are actually detractors, they'll tell people that your product is not good. They'll discourage people from using you. If it's a 7 or 8, they're actually neutral. If it's a 9 or 10, they're actually positive. So the idea with having a good net promoter score, it's a rough indicator that, number one, people are actually getting value out of your product or service. And if they're getting value out of your product or service, then obviously they're going to stay around much longer. So it improves the retention, but it also improves the organic growth rate. That means, assuming that you're not going to do any more marketing, it still shows that you will be able to generate some level of acquisition through word of mouth and through referral, because people like your product, they're willing to share it. Make sense? So most of these key metrics are usually measured in the form of over a period of time, over a cohort, or over a time frame. And that just ensures that as your business evolves, as you run different campaigns, different experiments, that you can compare apples to apples. Because you never know, because maybe, let's say, for example, after summer, it's a different season, people buy different volumes of that product, and maybe that was attributed purely to the environment, and it's not actually to do with your product itself, new features that you launch. There are many different factors that can kind of affect your experiments around retention. So you want to, as you try to track those metrics, try to ensure that you're actually batching it under those cohorts. So let's dive into some ideas, and then hopefully some of these will get you thinking about how you might actually improve some of those metrics that we talked about, and run different campaigns to just help build some form of customer loyalty. So the first one I want to talk about is what they call retargeting. And the idea with retargeting is basically for people who drop off in your funnel, maybe in the purchase process, or maybe people who have use your product, but after a while become inactive, retargeting is an effective tool. And retargeting basically is just the effort where you go back to these customers, you have their contact information in some way. Maybe you have their IP because they've viewed your ad or landed on your website, or maybe they've given your email at some point and you are feeding them some other specific content or promotional material that would get them to re-engage in the behavior that you're looking them to actually do. So an example would be cart abandonment emails. So if you notice that someone has been on your website, added some items to your cart, maybe they even filled out the email, but they did not complete the checkout process, then that's where you send them an email and say, hey, we noticed that you left some numbers, some products in your cart. Did you forget to check out, right? You see this with apps. Apps, sometimes they have push notifications where if you haven't used an app for a while, just having like a push notification for a promo or a reminder to try something out, that will kind of keep your product or service top of mind so that people don't forget about it and they might re-engage in it. So reminders in the form of retargeting is one thing that you can experiment with. Another thing that also is interesting is related to the cart abandonment side of things is if you look at certain e-commerce companies where you can save a product for later, like Amazon, you can add it to a wish list. Maybe you can bookmark something, you can favorite something. This encourages the behavior for the customer to, number one, they create an account because that's associated with the bookmark, the saving for later kind of thing. So you capture their contact info, but at the same time, you're also encouraging them to come back again. So even if they are maybe not ready to purchase at a given time, by making it convenient for them to repurchase or rebrowse their shopping history in the future, it might encourage them to come back and repurchase or use a product over and over again. The third tip is thinking about how you can engineer or design referability into your products, your campaigns, or maybe it's just putting the word out there and saying like, hey, do you know anyone who could use this? Or here's a link for easy sharing. So these can be manifested in many different ways. So, Dropbox is one example. Dropbox, where they said, hey, if you refer a friend, you get 250 megabytes extra, your friend gets 250 megabytes extra as well. Or if you look at Gmail back in the early days, if you remember them, you could only open up a Gmail account if you had a referral, a link from a friend. So that sense of exclusivity also promotes referring. Other ideas, if you see like with certain companies like Airbnb, if you refer a friend, you get a certain amount of credits, and then your friend gets a certain amount of credits as well. And the idea here is this kind of referral request, it, number one, keeps you top of mind again, just getting people to think like, hey, how else can I get some of these benefits? And in doing so, it increases your acquisition through word of mouth, but at the same time, it also increases loyalty because people are more likely to stand by the brands that they believe in, right? That they advocated for. So thinking about using referrals for retention, that's also a very effective campaign. The fifth idea is looking towards content. And on the content front, around things like thought leadership, tutorials, whether it be specific to your product or service, or whether it's more generic, more about the general theme or topic that you serve into. And it might not be specific to your product or service. So for example, if you have a mailing client like MailChimp, maybe it's about how to write effective campaigns, and it's not necessarily about how to create a MailChimp campaign. So these thought leadership pieces, the idea here is it's to encourage continuous learning with your customers. It's to continue to build your brand as an expert in the space, and also just to stay top of mind. In the realm of staying top of mind, you might even want to look at how you can possibly make adjustments to your product or service offerings such that your customer uses it more often if they don't already do. So one example I can think out of this is there's this local company here in Vancouver called Push Operations. When they started out, they were providing accounting services for companies in the hospitality and tourism industry. And what they found is, accounting is something that happens once a year. So usually every fiscal year or every reporting year, the companies, when they are evaluating the software that they're using for accounting and taxing purposes, they are more receptive to looking at other competitive offers. And so they kind of applied the approach of twofold. So one is changing the offering, but two, also integrating more deeply. They said, hey, what else do our customers use that are related to accounting, but on a more frequent basis? So they actually shifted and pivoted their offerings to provide payroll services as well. So also closely related to accounting, also very integrated. But at the same time, payroll is something that happens, bi-weekly here in Canada. So it's something that you see more often. And as you are mindful that this is the payroll software or solution provider that you're using, and because you're seeing it more often, you tend to twofold. One is it's easier to upsell them into other offerings. But number two, they also just stay a bit more loyal because they are not actively considering other alternatives, because it's like, oh, it's the big year come around, and now I'm looking at different offerings and re-evaluating my options again. They just tend to kind of keep it as the de facto because it becomes kind of the habit as well. So related to habit, thinking about how you can reinforce habitual behaviors in the usage of your product or service. And there's a good book about it. What was the name of the book again? Let me see. Habit. I believe the name of the book is Atomic Habits. Sorry, no, not that one. That's more on personal habits. The Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg. So that's a great book. Atomic Habits is also another great personal development book, but it's a different story. But yeah, look into the habit cycle that you can get your customers into. Because there are certain effective tools and campaigns that you can run, both with your product, but also with the way that the customer engages and uses your product to encourage people to use it more often. There's usually in the habit loop, there's a cue, something that triggers them to make them remember to think about using your product or service. And then from there, they develop that craving. And then when they actually use your product or service, they get some sort of reward coming out of it, and that reinforces that habit. Make sense? So yeah, think about how you can engage customers in the form of getting them to, let's say, for example, Instagram's one simple example. When you see an image of someone else, then you are reminded of like, this is something that I should also post about. And then when you post it, you get engagement, you get likes. That engagement fuels that reinforcement behavior, and then you are further encouraged to post even more as well. So are there certain loops that you can take advantage of? Again, it's not going to be possible for every single company, but if not, what are other ideas? So another idea is focusing on retention by focusing on your customer relationships. So what I mean over here is, there's nothing better than good customer service to keep customers around. And good customer service isn't just purely about ensuring that you're responsive to them, but it's also being proactive. Because for every complaint that you receive, you are pretty sure that there's at least 10 others that don't actually voice their complaints. So make sure that you're proactively going out, soliciting feedback, asking people what's going on, what's working well, what's not working well. But also, if you are aware of certain problems, proactively communicating that as well. So one simple example is I've often seen a lot of crowdfunding campaigns like Kickstarter, Indiegogo campaigns where they have delays in the production fulfillment. And because they don't communicate that, they end up with a lot of angry customers. On the flip side, if you communicate it, whether or not you make up for it through some form of compensation, that's a different story. But just the sheer act of communicating it, that actually results in a much more successful campaign because customers are not angsty about it. So be transparent and communicate proactively. Don't wait till people raise it as a problem before you actually think about reaching out or communicating. And the logic here is, if you focus on keeping customers happy, it's much easier to sell to an existing customer than it is to sell to a brand new customer that's unfamiliar with you. So if you have other offerings, if you have upsells, cross-sells, having good retention also helps increase the size of your customer over time. And it's not just the general long lifetime value of your customer with a fixed offering that you have, but you're increasing that value because they are purchasing more, they're upgrading their offerings, those kind of things. Another idea to think about is rewarding your customer through loyalty programs. We talked a bit about referrals, but think about other ways that you can engage with them. So, are there ways where you can give them credits, where you can give them cashbacks, where you can give them points for doing certain activities? And those rewards, because they will accumulate over time, they encourage people to hit certain milestones. It's a form of gamification. And people are driven to hit those milestones. And if they haven't hit those milestones, they're less likely to leave because they remember, oh, I'm this close to the milestone, and if I leave, I'm forfeiting all of the points that I have. If you're not in the tech world, some of those examples may not directly apply to you. So I do want to dive into some non-technical examples too. Membership programs. That's a really great way to improve retention as well. By having a membership, people feel like, number one, they're part of a community, but also number two, it's something that is recurring, so it's kind of top of mind for them. So that's one way of doing it. Stamp cards are a different way as well. So if you look at a lot of, let's say, restaurants, for example, come for buy 10 meals, you get a free meal. And the same idea there. As you collect those stamps, you don't want to throw away the card, and having that card in your wallet just reminds you to go back to the restaurant again as well. So those are things that help. Related to kind of tracking and figuring out repeat purchases. We talked about that in one of the previous episodes with Glenn from Red Chocolates. And, if you're in a situation where you're selling direct to consumer, or if you're in retail, sometimes it's a bit harder to track the individual customer orders because maybe you're selling through a distributor or you're selling in bulk to a retailer. So how do you know if a customer is coming back again if there's no form of subscription or membership? You can be creative there. You can create some campaign where if people, maybe it's like a lucky draw, submit your answer to a question by going on our website, and you stand a chance to win something. And through that, people are actually giving you their contact info. And each time they put in a submission, you're also cognizant that they are probably buying a new product. Maybe they need to scan a code or enter a access code in order to enter a new submission. So those are ways that you can kind of try to create some of that tracking. If you look at even grocery stores, they have those loyalty cards. And that's exactly how they actually track how often someone purchases, how much people purchase, what products people buy more often, because a lot of them have those reward cards, like a Safeway card, or let's say President Choice card for what's it called? Save One More, or yeah. So the idea is having those cards. You think that you're getting loyalty points and you're getting some discount out the other end by spending more, but you're also giving them a lot of information that you may or may not be aware that they're actually tracking on you as well. Other ideas, offering freebies or offering swag to people who engage in a campaign. That's a way to collect the information too. So for example, if you say like, hey, we are selling pants, and if you like your pants, take a picture of yourself in it, post it on Instagram, and then from there, we will give you something. And that's a way for you to engage and see like, oh, are people actually buying our products? Are they using it? Are they willing to advocate for it? And sometimes just simple gratuity, right? Just reaching out to them and having that human touch. Just saying like, hey, thanks for buying our product. We'd like to know if you had good service, if you enjoyed, those kind of things. That will help increase the loyalty and retention as well. One kind of top of mind example is when I bought a new handbag for my wife. That was quite a while ago, but I bought it from Coach. And the store manager personally called me up and said, hey, we saw that you bought this bag for your wife. Is she enjoying it? Is she liking it? And just that simple human follow-up that really also helps improve brand loyalty and retention. So I hope some of these ideas, I know they were kind of all over the place, but I hope some of them inspired you to think about some possible campaigns that you can experiment with, that you can try with your business. So yeah, that's it for this episode on retention. Tune in again next time for more ideas.